Namaste, Celia ji.
Namaste, Gaurav.
Welcome to this episode of Kahi Suni. This is a podcast by Sutradhar, and we basically try to bring about narratives and talk about various perspectives about Indian ancient history and mythology. So today we have gathered here to talk about a very remarkable woman from our ancient past. Looks like there is some disturbance.
Yeah, I'm not able to hear video also. Though I hear you, I don't see the video.
So, so we are back. Sorry for the inconvenience. Namaste Celia ji. Welcome to this episode of Kahisuni. And in today's episode, we will talk about a remarkable woman from our ancient history. And this remarkable woman is again a part of the series of various talks that we did, which are part of this anthology called Arya. Arya is the anthology recently released by Indic Academy, curated by Shiva Kumar. And this book basically talks about 10 remarkable women from our ancient history. And these 10 remarkable women come from various parts, various facets of life. So we talked about women who had donned the mantle of the queen. We talked about the women who were warriors. We talked about the women who basically did help shape the nation that the way we know today. And today's woman is slightly different because she is not a warrior. Her life is probably not as action packed as you would have experienced about the other women characters that we talked about. But today's woman is as important, if not more, because today the woman we are going to talk about is the woman of knowledge, and she is the woman who basically became remarkable in the area of philosophy and wisdom. And she is a woman who so there is a very this notion in modern world that women were not allowed to study, women were not allowed to to go to gurukul and learn Vedic philosophy, Vedic literature. And this woman basically breaks that myth, and we will talk about that woman with Celia ji. She has written the story in this book Arya, and the woman we are talking about is Gargi. And Gargi was someone who challenged a scholar, the most renowned scholar of his time, Yagyaval, for a Shastrarth or a debate. And Celia ji, before we get into talking about Gargi, let's spend some time talking about yourself and how you got into writing and how you got into writing about this particular character.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gaurav, and thank you for hosting us, and all of us, and for the support for the book. Very, very thankful, grateful to you for that. Uh, in terms of your question of how Gargi and how I came into writing and why this story, right? So, I mean, if I look back at my journey of, right from my childhood, I always had this thing of finding out what is beyond, whatever that is, right? At that age, whatever it meant in terms of why do people, do the things they do, or, just understanding, how does human mind work? And that kind of sort of evolved even in terms of what I studied and what I did. And over years I've done various things even professionally and all of that. And then I was in the corporate sector. I was working for a long time, then I took a break. I was doing things on my own, but I also, since I got the time, and that was something that was always there, I wanted to understand the whole philosophy, right? The Indic philosophy, we call it Vedanta. And our philosophy itself is so diverse. So it's very difficult to put a word and say, what is Vedic
Yeah.
philosophy or whatever. So I got into, then I started studying, reading a little bit of these things. And then I also studied yoga, which gave me the time to kind of really immerse in some of those books, including, so the beginning was more like, the Yoga Sutra and the texts related to yoga. And I was amazed at the depth and no, because I have also been exposed to the Western psychology, and because I've also done a master's in social psychology, on the whole thing of creativity, right? On the whole science of creativity. And then when I looked at this, the understanding of mind from this perspective, it's just so much holistic. It just goes, maybe three, four levels, even beyond that. So that was like from there was no looking back in terms of just the interest and what it meant. Also personally, of course, it's great to have read different things and have all the knowledge, but what does it make of you? Does that impact you? Does that change me in any way? Does that make me happier? Whatever. And yes, because of there's so, like, it can be at a very theoretical level. You can look at these concepts and we can talk about very intellectually, but you can also take them and really start reflecting and apply everything to you, because everything does come back to you, and that is what our philosophy tells us. So it's a dual thing of, yes, you want to understand, but you want to understand because you want to understand yourself, because in understanding that, you understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, I think you understand the world. So that's where it kind of began. And that is where, in fact, I encountered Gargi, because Gargi is an important part in a yoga text called Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita. And it's a dialogue between Yajnavalkya and Gargi. It basically lays out the whole, path of yoga and all of that. So that's where I encountered, and I was quite fascinated that there is this woman who seems to, today we talk of the glass ceiling, right? Women can reach till there, and then somehow there's something invisible which stops them. Here is a woman, and I think in our context, to be able to do that, to be at that level of, wisdom, and that level of understanding, experiential knowledge is the highest, right? Is the highest in our this thing. And therefore, here is a woman who has done that and who seems to have been instrumental in bringing this whole knowledge out. So from there, I kind of just that interest in Gargi, and then from there I then read the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and whatever texts were there around, and then I had read those things, and then when this came up in terms of anthology, I thought, if there is a way that this woman could be brought out, but not only about this woman, but also bring some of that knowledge, some of that wisdom, if it can even touch, through the story, if it can touch people, that would be great. So that was the intent of
So,
yeah.
so very interesting, because it's important that we talk about these women, and our modern world knows about them, so that they don't feel like that women were always oppressed and docile, and they were always following behind men in their various walks of life, because that was not the case. And especially here, she stood up and challenged a man, right, in a court full of men, probably, most likely. So I'll the very interesting part about the story that you picked up. One is, obviously, most of the other stories have a lot of action going on. In your story, it's a conversation. So it's probably would have been very difficult, because you had to make the conversation very interesting, because in terms of the movement of characters or the movement of events was not that much. So one thing I liked a lot about the way you have picked up, you started with the joke, and so it was like that Yagwalk says, "No, I am not saying that I am the greatest scholar. I just need the cows." Right. So that sets the tone that it's not going to be very heavy text that will bog you down, but you can probably enjoy reading. So that is one thing that I liked a lot about this. I don't know whether it was a conscious choice or whether that joke is there in your research. I am not familiar with, or whether it was your creation, but I found it very interesting. And then you have basically chosen to construct the story in a manner that you keep alternating between the current and the flashback to connect the conversation with the Gargi's learning where she would have gotten them from. So, how you went about constructing that story? It was a, can you take us through the process
Yeah.
a little?
Sure, sure. So yeah, I mean, in fact, the earlier version, which my co-authors have also read, started with that point which is the highest conflict, and to me that took a long time for me to reconcile, and I think that's something that even today, if you read the exchange between Yagnavalkya and Gargi, the point where he says, "You're asking something that you will lose your head. Don't ask that because you'll lose your head." So that, I
Hmm.
mean, in one sense it can sound so violent, right?
It's
And
more
so
like a
that
crescendo.
yeah, so that was like the most dramatic in that whole exchange, and that's where the story started, where I began
Hmm.
initially, my initial draft. And then so then you start there, and then we came back, so it was going a little bit in circles. So then I kind of came back to making it slightly linear, with yet with those flashbacks. Now, by the way, the incident you mentioned, that dialogue is there in the Upanishad. He says, yeah, I just
It's
need the
very rare to find humor in our these dharmic texts, right? And when you find it, you should cherish it. And
yeah.
it was a good way to. And this also shows how quick-witted Yagyavak was, and he came up with an answer then and there. He was like. Maybe he could have had a great career as a stand-up comedian also, because these days they are talking more philosophy than anybody else. But coming
Yeah,
back to
so yeah, the
this,
the structure, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
to me, I think the thought where I started was, I thought this is such a great text. This is such a great exchange between, and in that exchange he's explaining everything. He's explaining, I mean, between these dialogues, he's explaining the structure of universe, what is it that a man is, what he needs to do, comparing him finally to the tree and everything, right? The entire metaphysics of the universe. So I thought this is something that I should, somehow keep. So this is my starting point. How do I take this into a story? That was my starting point. It was never, what's the story of Gargi? How do I put this in? So that became the frame. And then of course the other data point I had, this dialogue was a solid chunk. The only other kind of little longish data point I had was the other text on yoga, which I mentioned earlier, which again, I think that's a much later text, and we don't know how it has come through, what changes it might have gone through yet. So that was another solid. So these were two solid references. Other than that, you hardly, I mean, I really looked around. There are references, there are places where she's mentioned, but there's nothing to kind of really, uh, you know, uh, bring in a chunk. So these two became my frames, right? I had these two pieces. Now it was, how do I weave and make it little easy on readers, or make it, because consuming, I mean, some of these you can read a paragraph or two lines, you can reflect for days, months, years, right? And it takes time. It slowly grows on you, and maybe every time you read, its meaning changes because of where you are, where your mind is. So therefore it was not something that I took lightly in terms of and therefore I did a lot of work, even because I couldn't have given the entire dialogue as well, because that's also too long. It might not go in the
Yeah.
short story format. So I did a little bit of abridging, and took that judgment of what I can drop and what I can keep. So with this frame, then I think, yeah, it was a little bit of a simplistic thing of weaving her life from a chronological perspective. But what I did with that was to also, of course, one is to, what kind of a character was she, right? Because she must have been somebody who who was born with that curiosity, with that
Curiosity.
seeking somewhere,
Yes.
right? Things like that kind of helped weave that. And what I also did was to, if you look at the different names of the different segments of the story, each of them is actually, if you look at Yoga Vasishtha, it tells you, and many texts refer to 7 stages of enlightenment. So, there are different stages you need to pass to reach that, right? And therefore, each of those, actually, those terms are from that. So the 7 segments are basically named after that. And what I've also done, which is, not for the reader to know, but it was quite interesting for me, was to take the cycle of life, the Ritu, right? So you will see that every stage in her life is a season. In terms of how the environment has been described, the trees that have been described, the season, external environment, and then the 6 seasons, and then she comes out of the cycle in the 7th one. So these were some things that I had fun with,
So,
and
so
I kind of used.
I realize it now when you said it, but while reading it, I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
pay that kind of attention
I'm
to
sure. Yeah,
this. But it's interesting when I know it now, I find it more interesting.
right.
So that brings to another question about the because Gargi is a character about whom not much is known. Even in your research material, it would have been very difficult to find much literature about life of Gargi and how she came to become a scholar and all that kind of stuff. So, what are the challenges when you are researching for a character like Gargi?
Yeah, many. And I think even today, when people read, and even some of my co-authors had mentioned, that is the whole bit of the time itself. I think there are so many different versions of uh, when this happened, right? Because you would think Vedic times, so it must have been before the Mahabharata. It must have been. So in my reference, I have spoken about Krishna. Uh, so, and how I arrived at that was, again, these data points. One of the data point is that in the debate, uh, one of the questions asked is about Parikshit. He says, and the question is, where did the descendants of Parikshit go? That's one data point. And then we also know that Gargi was the granddaughter of sage Garga, and there is a Garga Samhita. Again, I mean, there can be things like, you could say it's a different Garga, can't be sure,
There
but of
could be
course
multiple
multiple.
Yagyavalkya also.
Exactly. So all
Yes.
that is there, given we had to do a story, and given. So yes, those were some of the challenges, but especially this bit in the dialogue, in the exchange, to have spoken about Parikshit and his descendants, kind of clearly, I think, says that, it is somewhere much after that. So that was one point. And then, yeah, because Garga Samhita is all about describing Krishna's life, there is a text. And so therefore, that reference. But that is something that I think many people, when they read immediately, there is a little bit of a thing saying, and Janaka, the name Janaka, right? Sita's father. So how
Then
is
again,
that
Janak was many, right? So all the kings of
of
Mithila were
Mithila?
called Janak, right?
Janak, correct,
So
correct, correct.
Sita's father was probably 16th Janak or something, right? So,
Exactly.
so even that is confusing, right?
Correct,
Which
correct.
Janak was debating with Ashtavakra? Was it the same Janak who was
Yeah,
talking to
yeah.
Yagyaval? It's very, I mean, difficult to put all these things together unless you do very deep research, and maybe somewhere that distinction would become clearer. But it depends on how deeper you want to go in the research. And that is what brings us to this another question that is flashing on the screen. What do you think is the limit to which dramatization can be adopted, especially with stories like Gargi's, where we have limited information to work with?
Yeah, I think correct. I mean, if we had to focus a lot on her life, you can look at the dialogue. You can maybe perhaps think, because some of the data points are there. Right? She was one of the Navaratnas in his court. That this dialogue happened, and the good part about this is the dialogue is there, right? What she says, what he says, and the
Yes.
court, and all the different people. So that's a great thing. It's a very specific thing you have. Uh, yes, I think it would then get into a person's imagination, given this, because this is the solid thing that you have, that given who she is, the kind of conversation they are having, the kind of question she's asking, and the kind of wisdom and knowledge that she's bringing into this exchange, based on that you would do it, right? Yeah, there is no really other thing to. Yes, it is challenging, so I would think, yeah,
So,
it can. And
so in your opinion, is it easier or difficult? Like having less information available about a character makes it easier to write about her or more difficult to write about
I think you have the freedom to imagine what you want, so
her?
that's the good part. But I think, yeah, I would have loved to have some more, because then, when you're writing something like this, you want to be very responsible, because what you write, because you are taking a character which was real and then you're writing, so there is a responsibility on you. And therefore, I think, while yes, you can be free, you can imagine what you want, I think it would be irresponsible to just loosely imagine things and write. So that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to keep that minimal as a frame, to bring out this exchange as the core of the story.
So, so today only somebody asked a question about which is your favorite movie, where the whole movie is based around dialogues, and the person had a picture of before sunset, I think, on the tweet that the question was asked, and two names came to my mind. One was 12 Angry Men, which was adopted in Hindi as Ek Ruka Hua Faisla, and
Hmm.
another was the Man from Earth. I don't know whether you have watched that movie or not, but these are the couple of movies where the whole thing is they are set up in a single room with a bunch of characters sitting and talking. And what makes this very different than other movies we are used to seeing, other entertainment, romance, or whatever genre we pick up. The interesting part about these is that the dialogue has to hold the audience, right? The dialogue has to be interesting enough to keep the audience going, to make the audience flip the page. Correct. So that is something that I mean, how much of the help was it that this dialogue was actually available to you in its entirety? If I may say, I mean, you had much more material to work with, and then you had to cut it down to
Hmm.
size to fit a short story. So, how much of help it was, and how much you had to simplify or change that text to make sure that the modern audience, the common people, are able to connect to it without feeling bored while reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the examples you gave is full of emotional content, right? It is about life and what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and all of that, right? And there are many. I was also thinking while you were talking, there's a play, right? Tumhari Amrita is also.
Yes,
It's just some. So it's
yes.
just. But
Letters.
yeah, but those letters are full of emotion and the drama that life is made of, right? Here there is
Correct.
no such drama. It's
It's
all about.
philosophy.
It's all, yeah. It's all
Heavy
about
stuff.
heavy stuff, you can say. But to me, I mean, in fact, I get excited about it, like how people get excited about those dialogues. So I find it very fascinating, this whole bit of somebody trying to, because there is a method to this madness of life, and that's how I see it. To me, it is very interesting. It is like very intriguing. It's full of mystery and things you can find out and all that. But yeah, but fundamental difference is that, right, it's not about our everyday life and our pains and our emotions, our hopes, because that's what hooks us as human beings, right? That's what stories are made of. Stories about this drama called life. But these dialogues are sort of, maybe one kind of beyond that, to understand what is, below all this drama, and what, behind all this that we do here. So therefore, yes, I think there is a certain inclination, and maybe there is a certain set of people who might, you know, like that or be interested in reading that. So I had to keep that balance of keeping that being responsible in, not distorting that, yet making it lighter, I would say. You can't make it completely light, but and I think one of the things I did over a few iterations was to make it those are, rest of it is kind of in prose. This one is a little bit of poetry kind of thing, right? Just
Yes.
made it so it also kind of makes it shorter, rather than, and it brings out that people also know while they're reading visually that, okay, this is coming. you know yeah.
Uh, so,
So
uh, so I must congratulate you because I personally am not a student of philosophy, and I did not get bored while reading the story. I liked it,
amazing.
and it takes effort and it takes real skill to write a story like this, where there is not much action happening, and even in the dialogue there is no emotional connect between the two main characters, right? So Gargi and Yagyavalk were not feeling
Correct.
any bits of emotions towards each other. So it's even more difficult, right? Like writing a before sunset would be easier than writing this conversation and keeping it interesting for a common audience. So I must congratulate you about that. And I think what helped a lot was how you have weaved it with the flashbacks, because the flashbacks are not very heavy on philosophy,
Right.
right? The flashbacks are simple things, like they are simple day-to-day tasks in Gargi's life, and it also shows how a curious child learned from the environment, and how she kept basically gathering all the information she could get from all the sources available to her. So it shows her innate desire to learn more, and it connects very beautifully to the conversation that was happening in the court. So I think that helped a lot, keeping that story interesting throughout. And as you mentioned, that you tried to be a little poetic about it, so that also added to the flow where as I was reading it. So it's very interesting. So, coming to another question from one of our audience, how relevant is Gargi in today's context, and what lessons can be learned from the Gargi story by modern women?
Yeah, I mean, relevance relevance of our, so two parts, right? Relevance of these texts are forever. It is for humanity. And I think if we dig deeper and deeper, and I think when you come to the last point, you'll come to our text. That's kind of given. And everything, even today, I mean, you look at science and where it's going, right? The quantum phenomena we are talking about, we say there is no matter, there's only energy. And all of the, I think, as we push the boundaries of our rational thought, right, which is what we live in, right, our lives is based on, and we kind of give a lot of, when somebody says, science says this is true, there's an immediate respect, right? There's an immediate kind of validity to that, right? That is still in the domain of rational thought. And I think even science today is pushing, the boundaries are kind of breaking, right? And they are seeing that it is going beyond that. And I think, and wherever you start with, doesn't matter where you start the investigation with, I think once you kind of pass through all of this, you will reach, where our Vedanta, what the Vedanta says, and the knowledge that it is already there. It's there for all of us to pick from, take from, learn from. So that's one part. Now coming back to Gargi, and so I would also look at, I mean, if I have all of us, right, and as women, especially since this is a women's anthology, and I think all of us, every single one of us who has written this story, somewhere has something you pick the character for something because you see that either that character in you, or you see something in that character that you want to imbibe or whatever, right? So to me, and this to me I think to me it is about how a woman, and I think of course it is irrespective of gender, but I think in our context of, the world today, and like you said, we have certain preconceptions. Sometimes culturally over the years we have uh, lost touch with certain things. So there is a certain expectation from women that women will are of a certain kind, will do a certain type of thing. In intellectually, they are, somewhere, and not anywhere else. So I think all of this is busted with this story, right? And this is not a story. And in the Upanishad, so you have the dialogue there as something real happening. So therefore, I think that bit that women can be anything. There is no, sometimes, because we all question, right? We all think about what is right, what is wrong. Am I going beyond, am I doing something wrong because the society thinks, that's what is not expected of me. And I think these characters like Gargi answer that. And personally, she has for me to say that, women, if I have a desire to know something, if I have a desire or a, calling towards something, that's the right thing, because that is what is coming from me. And therefore, so there are people before me, there are great women who have done that, right? And who have chosen their own path. And if you look at, I mean, this whole thing of, yes, and like how you started, that there were women who studied the Vedas, they went beyond, and they were advisors in the court, and she reached the pinnacle, right? Pinnacle of knowledge and wisdom. So, what's not to learn from her, That's what I
So
would
I
say.
think one very interesting point that you made, and I used to watch a lot of movies, and I will quote one such movie, and I'll try and connect it to what the point you made, and why it is important to know about these characters. There is a movie based on World War II about Germans fighting Russians, and the movie is called Enemy at the Gates, and the Russians are basically struggling, and they are running away from the battle, and they are shooting each other. They are not allowing them to run away, and all that the tactics they are trying. And then one guy who was probably part of the communications division, the propaganda arm of the army, he suggests a solution, and the solution was give them a hero. So, to boost the morale of the troop, give them a hero. And then
Okay.
they boost up this Vasily Zaitsev character who was a sniper, and how he sniped so many Germans today. How this one. So every day they started publishing about him, and creating propaganda stories around him, creating pamphlets around him, and that boosted the morale of all the Russian soldiers. And that is important here. I mean, the way, if our text, if we analyze, we see like when Yudhishthir was sad and he was talking to Brihadarashtra, he said, "See what happened to me." He said, "Don't worry, you are not the first one who is facing this problem. There was someone before you who faced this and who braved through this, so you also can take care of the situation." So it's basically having a hero and seeing someone who has achieved something remarkable in the past gives basically what you can say motivation to people to achieve higher standards in their lives, right? So that way, this is very the way our entire ancient text is written is similar, right? When Yudhishthir goes and asks Bhishma how to tackle this situation, he will tell him a story. You are not the first, right? When Abhimanyu died, Narad came. He said, "No, yeah, he is not the first one to die, right? Even Bharat died. Even Mandhata died." He gives the name of like 16 kings. He said, "Are you saying that they should not have died? If they died, everybody died." So the way is that everything is when you know the examples of the past who have done something or something happened to them, it actually helps you. In a sad situation, it helps you cope up with this. In a happy situation, it helps you understand the situation. And when you need motivation, they help you motivate, right? So that is why knowing about these women and talking about them is very important. And I am glad that people are writing these stories. And in that context, another question comes to mind, and that is, if not Gargi, who you would have picked up in the to write about? I mean, if I had to ask you to write one more story about another remarkable woman, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I think I'll explore something else, if I had to. Like, I don't have a name in mind, but I remember one of the things I did, and, Ulupi was a story that, Ranjini
Rajni,
wrote.
yes.
Ranjini, yeah. But that was something I remembered later. I couldn't connect at that time. I remembered later that there was something we were doing about, women from mythology. So this was something I was quite amazed that, okay, there was a woman who actually went and told Arjuna that, so she expressed her
She was a
desire to
widow
him.
also.
Yes, so I thought that was okay. That's interesting. In fact, so then I had read up about her and done something. So that's something I can think of. But yeah, I mean, if it comes now, I will explore a very different facet of through maybe that will give me a good opportunity to also get into Mahabharata the way you guys are, completely into it. So yeah, I don't have a name in mind, but I think what I'll do is something very different from what I did here,
So,
is how I would think.
so I have one question which is probably applicable to only two of you in this Arya anthology, and you might have guessed it. My question is, at what point in your process you found out that there was another author writing a story about Maitreyi, and how it affected you in this journey?
Yeah,
How
because I
you took
think,
that information?
yeah, both our stories had, I mean, the other character comes in, right? There
Yeah.
is Maitri
So
in
there is
my
a lot of
story.
overlap in terms of the characters, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, was it, just thinking back, maybe we knew these were the stories, was it? But of course, I mean, once we had our drafts, then we did read through each other's stories and, commented and kind of did that. But yeah, I don't know if we really tried to fit in and say, see, I have said this about her, you also say the same. None of that. I don't think we did that.
Okay.
It's kind of independent, but both
So
of
you
them
were
are.
not worried about being too similar or being too different from either of the stories. Like, let's say Yagyavalk is a common character in both of the stories, and Gargi also features very briefly in. Sorry, Maitreyi features very briefly in your story, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, were you not conscious that is this Maitreyi similar to the Maitreyi in the other story, or she should be same, or do I have to take a different approach and make her different? I mean, were those thoughts not in your mind?
Not at all, actually. Now that you're saying, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe, we could have thought of that. Not really, but I think because it was, she alluded to Gargi's debate, I think, in her
Yes,
story.
in her story,
And
exactly.
yeah, in my reference, it is from the other text. The Yoga
The
Yajnavalkya
ending.
Samhita has, there is Maitri in that text, and that's where I kind of put that in there. So yes, I think that part was good, but I think yeah, over this journey of the book, it's kind of nice. I think Kavita and I, somewhere, I think we also feel like, okay,
And you
the
both are
similar. So
like
there is a
inclined towards the
sisterly.
philosophy. I'm saying
Yeah,
you
yeah,
both
yeah.
are inclined towards the philosophy, and it might have been a
And
great uh, equation that you would have developed among two of you.
absolutely, absolutely, it was a pleasure meeting her as well in Bangalore. So yeah,
So,
somewhere, yeah, I feel like there is some connection, and therefore connected stories and perhaps,
so
some
there,
connection.
there is one more question that comes to mind, and that is, how did you make sure? Because this was an anthology about remarkable Vedic women, right? How did you make sure that this does not become a Yagyavalk story? This had to remain a Gargi story. and there is a big chance when you are writing this story it will end up becoming a Yagyavalk story. So how did you manage to make sure that it doesn't fall in that trap?
Yeah, I think there were different, again, there were different approaches available, right? One approach was, and which is the traditional story approach, is have an antagonist. And that antagonist could very well have been Yagnavalkya, because there are so many stories about him. There are stories of, his, in different Puranas also there are, right? Of course, we might say there are different Yagnavalkyas. We don't know. But that was one route to take. Also because there is this dialogue, heated dialogue that he, tells Gargi. That was an approach that could have been taken, but I think it's also a journey. It's also a journey of, sometimes, I mean, like yesterday we were discussing about ideas of feminism and what it means. Because if we start thinking of women against men, or women trying to be men, or everything that men do, or so if you have to be something good, you have to put somebody else down. So I think I consciously kind of kept that aside to say. And of course, I mean, of course, even our texts kind of clearly state how great Yagnavalkya was, and therefore, so that's kind of, that balance has been brought about. But to your point on how to keep, I think he is a strong presence in the story, because I think it is because of him that the story moves forward. And and that dialogue is at the heart of the whole story. But I think by giving the lens of Gargi's life is how I think it was always about what she saw,
Correct.
and what she saw of him as well, and everything else, right? So I hope with that it didn't come across as much
So
as his
I'm
story.
I'm I'm glad you did not take that approach of an antagonist and protagonist, because then it would have come across maybe a more formulaic kind of a thing. You are trying to follow a formula, and in my personal opinion, it's very interesting. I mean, the thing is that the movies or the cinema or the stories, the way they portray protagonist or antagonist, in normal people's life, that is not how it is, right? I mean, in your life, if I have to ask you who is the villain in your life, you will probably not be able to name a person. Correct. So our lives are not like cinema. And in our life, I mean, mostly if you watch sports movies, they typically end up showing another guy as the villain, but that guy is also trying to win the game, right? So how can
Exactly.
he be the villain? If you make the movie from that person's perspective, he will might as well be the hero. So if you look at it, and this is a thing that you will see in most of the movies. And my favorite sports movie is, by the way, the greatest game ever played, and it is about golf. And golf is a sports which is very boring.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
connecting like philosophy as a
Yeah.
subject and golf
Right.
as a sport. And in that, again, there is this young guy, upstart, a commoner, who picks up golf as a sport, maybe a Gargi equivalent for that. And then there is this guy, Harry Warden, who is the world champion. He is the Yagyavalk of golf. Correct. And in the movie, they have not shown, the movie is from the perspective of this commoner, how this common American rose to become a golf professional. And he actually idolized Harry Warden when he was growing up. And this is based on a true story, by the way. So this guy idolized Harry Warden, and he learned from him basically by idolizing him. And then there comes a situation when he is facing Harry Warden, and there is a scene where the Britishers, Harry Warden was a Britisher, and Britishers were gold champions, and America were like upstart team. And this guy's the management committee or someone who from that, they say that how can a commoner beat him? And this Harry Warden says, he if he beats me, it would be because he is a great sportsman. It's not because he's a commoner or a royal or something. So basically, they have not tried to show Harry Warden as the villain.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is one of the things that makes this movie special for me. And that is why this is my favorite sports movie. Despite being about a sport which I have never played, I have never watched on television, and it's probably one of the most boring sports to watch, to be honest. If you are, I don't even know the rules of the game, to be honest. I don't even know how to count uh, the scores, right? So that way I'm saying it takes tremendous efforts and skill to construct a story like this, but this has ideally should have more connect with the masses, because their lives are also like that, right? In your life, in your day-to-day life, there is no hero, no villain. You are
We
going
have
about
enough
things, and
drama without the villains, and
exactly.
so
Exactly, and
that's
the thing about feminism you made about yesterday's conversation, I basically I watched some bits of it, and I picked that point there, where this was like typically feminism is trying to put male versus female, but that is not the case. And I was watching some video about somebody, I forgot who it was, and the point that person was making was that for our most of our existence, men and women were not fighting each other, they were helping each other survive. So all this belief that men were trying to oppress women, or women were trying to break away from that oppression and all that, that is as big a myth as it can be, because most of the time they were trying to help each other live together and survive for a better future. And that is how we have also seen in our families and in our daily life also. So this whole concept of men versus women, I personally am also not very gung-ho about, because that is not true, and that should not be the case, right? You grow together. There is no growth when you are basically pitting the two against each other. So I mean, a very long point to say a very simple thing, but I think it was important
yeah,
to
it's a
put it
very
across.
nuanced thing, right? Yeah, I mean, we cannot simplistically say anything, right? There are some things which are true, right? There are some things that there would be women who feel perhaps, that they want to do things, they don't have this, social structures or whatever doesn't allow. Today, I'm saying today, or maybe, So I think we have to be cognizant of what is, yet know that as women we have our power, and and grow into that power, rather than try to be something else externally because that's what is valued outside. For example, so I think it's an individual journey for all of us, and we all go through cycles. And I have had my own, understanding and growth and all of that on this whole thing. And I think as women, I'm sure all of us have gone through our own, our own experiences and our own inferences, and we grow into it. But I feel for any human being, right? It's not just women. For any human being, I think to be authentically you is what is freedom, and to
So
discover what is that power you have, and to stay in that power.
one
Yeah.
the thought that came to mind while through this conversation is that all these 10 stories, or if we pick apart other women also, they never claimed victimhood, which is basically another thing that is very common these days, right? Everybody wants to become a victim and whine about it. Most of these women went through difficult situations. Most of these women tried and achieved remarkable achievements, but they never cried victim in their life. कि देखो मेरे साथ क्या. Kunti never said कि you tried to burn me, my husband died when I was like I mean, I became a young widow to raise five kids on my own. Two of them were not my own also. So they never complained like this, right? They braved through these situations. They all, and like Gargi also never complained कि see मेरे को स्कूल नहीं भेजा फिर भी मैं इतना पढ़ लिया. So there was no complaining about things. The point I'm trying to make is that this whole situation, or this whole what you can call it, this trend of claiming victimhood was not there in our ancient India, and they were all trying to live through their life and achieve. I mean, it was more about competition with self rather than trying to see what others are doing, or getting into the trap of a jealousy or ego or that kind of stuff. And I was telling someone in one of these conversations that if you had to pick remarkable women from the ancient past, 10 is a very small number. You will be able to find a plenty. I mean, I personally have read through many literatures, I mean, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and various other Puran. It is very difficult to find a weak female in our literatures. You will find weak male very easily. There are few, there are plenty, but weak females there are none, and that says a lot, right? So that again goes through that Shakti and that kind of philosophy that we have had. But I'm glad that these stories are being brought out, and you did not answer what next. Maybe you will probably pick up some other thing. But I mean, in
Yeah,
terms of writing, do you have any other plans? Do you continue writing more? And if
I
so,
would.
what is in your mind?
I would like to continue writing, and yeah, hopefully something soon. I mean, I don't have a concrete, like I said, a character, but see, women and of course, philosophy is something very close to me. Women and what it means, right? Looking back, because, and even this book, and I think just extending your point, Gaurav, that it is so important for us to hear stories that tell us that we were, powerful, that you were not helpless. And maybe there is a variety of story. Maybe there are also characters that were, perhaps, victims, so to call, and that's fine. I think that's life, right? You have all kinds of characters, but I think we all grew up. I think our generation grew up thinking, if we look at, what we studied and what exposure we had, more or less a bulk of us grew up thinking that we don't have examples to look back. And I mean, we had Dhamma Chitra Kathas you would read and all
Yeah.
that, but yet in popular this thing, we did not grow up with strong stories. We don't think that we can look back and find women who we can be proud of. And I think what the identity we take of ourselves today is definitely about, you are your ancestors, you are a living, your DNA still has that. And therefore in your mind you do somewhere, whether consciously or subconsciously, you think you are that. And therefore when you have powerful stories and you listen to them, and they become, you become that. And so it's very important that these stories really reach our young girls and children and everybody around. But coming back, Gaurav, what was your original question?
It's okay. So, so I'm saying there is this question from one of our audience members, and this is who is the most inspirational woman in your life?
Oh, this feels like my MBA interview, if I had to pick somebody.
You can pick more. I mean, more than one if you have. I mean, I'm sure there would be few.
I think I would look at qualities across different women than picking one woman. And of course, I mean, you always look closer home. And if I have to look closer home, I would look at different qualities that for example, my mother has, my sister has, or there was, aunt, my uh, mom's elder sister. I can pick that. These are what, come to me. And there are certain aspects, right? You always, I think, like in Gargi, there's a dialogue saying you always learn something from everyday experiences. So there's always some quality that you can look at and be inspired by and pick. So I think I would pick those.
So, I mean, we are heading towards the end of our conversation. We are closer towards the 1 hour mark. So, is there any closing thoughts, closing remarks that you want to say and want to add to this conversation?
I think I just told about that, we need more powerful stories. We need more real stories, and we don't have to be very colored about, yes, all of them have to be strong, all of them have to be. I think we need to be honest, we need to be real, we need to be open, we need to look at our past with that lens. with an open mind, because I think over generations we have closed our minds to the greatness of what we have within ourselves. And if we look back and if we take from there, I think there is so much for us, not just as women and the stories, but there is so much for humanity there that we should, it is our duty to take that and also pass on to the generations, coming generations. That's what I would say. And of course I would like to show this book and ask
So,
everybody to read this and tell us how it is, and let's kind of make this a movement in terms of talking about women and strong women, and make that normal, right? Let it not be an aberration that we have to pick somebody from there and say it was a strong women. I think women are strong, so we bring that out through our past, and that carries on to the present and future.
as Celia ji pointed out, read all the 10 stories from the book Arya. One of the stories is by Celia ji, that is the story of Gargi. I will be putting the link from where you can buy the book in the description of this chat, this video. So you can click there and purchase the book and recommend it to your friends, because these are the stories that we all should know about. And especially if you have girl child or kids in your family who are looking for inspirations from our ancient women, this is one of the books that you can refer to. And one good thing about this book is that they have not tried to distort what is there in the original text. They have tried to stay true to the original text, and that is a good thing. And my personal belief is that most of our ancient texts were not written only as stories to be enjoyed and have fun with. They were written with the intent to teach a lesson to the future generations. And when we distort the stories in the original text, when we are trying to do these retelling, we actually distort the messaging that they wanted to tell. And this is very dangerous trend, and we should not be falling victim to this trend. So this book, I have read all the 10 stories, and I can vouch for it that they have stayed true to the extent possible. And for stories like Gargi and Maitreyi, and some of the stories where the original text does not have too much detailed information, obviously there will be some creative liberties, so which is okay. And before we conclude this conversation, there is a housekeeping announcement. The next conversation of Kahi Suni is on Saturday, 18th March, 7 p.m. And this is with Pranshu. We had a conversation with Pranshu about Ramayana, and we could not talk enough about Ramayana in that conversation. So this you can probably imagine as a sequel to that chat that we have had with him. So tune in next Saturday, 18th March, 7 p.m. For a conversation with Pranshu Saxena about Ramayana and various Ramayana across the world is the topic. So we will talk about that. And thank you, Celia ji, for your time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much,
Dhanyavad.
Gaurav. Thank you.